Canso is the Canadian name. The British would refer to it as a Catalina, and the Americans would call it a PBY. PB, patrol bomber, Y made by Consolidated, the big company. And the Canso, the PBY-5A, was the descendant of, 20 years of flying boats by Consolidated. So yes, it was. It was a very basic aircraft in many ways, but it was very reliable within its limits. Then we had Pratt Whitney engines, which were great. They went on. Now, Wrights might not like it, but they used to say a Wright engine needs a reason to run. A Canso needs a reason to stop. So a Pratt Whitney. But no, it was very reliable. It was very basic. I had a general step through the wing one day. Plastered it. We used medical band-aids to patch up the wing till we could get back to Vancouver. The big thing, I think, for Cansos, it could land on the water as well as on land. So that let us operate all through the high Arctic. As soon as the ice went out in the spring, we'd go north with various resupply and things like that. And then around the BC coast, which is where we were stationed, we got into some very interesting and strange places on that. It drew about 4 feet of water, and you could go many, many places. We never got to try it, but we were told it could do 28 hours. It had these big fuel tanks. It's what the Canso is credited with doing away with the submarine wolf packs, the U-boat packs on the North Atlantic. Because prior to that, there'd only been some of the big ones, the Martin Mars, the Sunderland, but they're very expensive and very few. Canso, they turned them out by the hundreds. And they were out over the convoys. And if you look at the one in Hamilton, it's all white because that way it blends in with the clouds over the North Atlantic. And it could carry two 500-pound depth chargers on each wing. And the poor old submarine captain, he couldn't look straight up. So no, it could go out and they could fly out of Halifax and be out there for 12 hours or more and then come back in. And I mentioned night landings. They had that down to an art by then with putting down flare paths and that. So no, it had lots of endurance. It wasn't very fast. It was 105 knots to 110 knots straight and level, which is about 120 miles an hour. And it was very heavy on the controls. It had none of the power steering that you get today. You really had to work at it, and because it's a high wing airplane to keep the propellers out of the water, it parasoled. It went through the air in curves, swinging like a pendulum. So you had to be in on the rudders and that. And when they moved us from Air Defense Command to Air Transport Command, they sent some of the Air Transport Command tech pilots out. And the one I was flying with, who had never flown a Canso, said, well, that's fine, but you're letting it swing back and forth. I said, well, show me. Well, within 5 minutes, his legs were cramping, and I said, no, you just let it do it. It'll do it all day long. So, no, but it was a great aircraft. It could outturn a Harvard trainer. I mean, for getting in and out of these narrow fjords, it was a great aircraft.
When I started Canso, I thought I could call it after my last name or some Latin word that nobody understood. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, what do? We do the same thing day in and day out. It's kind of boring. You just get on with it. It's not flashy. And my dad was an Air Force officer and a pilot, and he flew an aircraft called the Canso, which is right here. And in the Second World War, it actually was partially responsible for defeating the U-boat menace. After the war, my dad flew it on northern mapping with 408 Squadron in Ottawa, and then he did search and rescue. First flew in 1933. It's still flying, slow and steady, gets you through heavy weather, and that's the name. And we love the airplane.
In 1956, we were told that a weather ship out in the Pacific, about 500 miles away from Vancouver Island, had a chap on board who had a brain injury, and he had to be medicated right away. And they wanted to know if we could go out. Well, the weather was quite bad, and it was a bit rough out there, but this was the night before, and we went and checked with the weather very carefully. We fueled the ship just enough to get out there and back, and so it wouldn't be too heavy. And we checked the height of the waves and so forth. We had contact with the weather ship So first thing in the morning, after dawn, we took off our Canso and we flew out to the weather ship, and it was fairly choppy out there, but the wind was blowing in the correct direction. So we told them that we were going to land, and we landed into wind and about a mile away from this weather ship in fairly rough water. And then a lifeboat came out with his man on board, and the lifeboat was going up and down, and the Canso was going up and down, and we finally practically threw the man on board. There was a couple of nurses on board too. There was no doctor on board, but there was a nurse on board. We got them all clamped down on board, got away from the lifeboat, and turned into the wind. Fortunately, we were flying almost parallel to these large waves, and we took off, using JATO, which stands for Jet Assisted Takeoff. We had 4 JATO bottles on this airplane, and had them all fixed up for takeoff. So we took off, we opened the throttles, got the aircraft onto the step, and then fired off all 4 JATO bottles and took off straight into the air and never touched the ground again, and got a course for Victoria and flew directly to Victoria at about 3,000 feet and landed at Victoria, got rid of our patient on board, and then flew our Canso back to Vancouver, and I went home and had supper, and that was the end of it. Apparently they made a bit of a fuss about it, and my boss thought that it was kind of a dangerous trip and so forth, and eventually I ended up by getting this medal for it from the Queen.